Okay, this is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. This is the entry on Plotinus, and I'm just going to read the first section. Actually, I might read the first couple of sections. So, titled Plotinus, first published on the 30th of June 2003, with a revision on September the 15th, 2012. And as I say, this is from the Stanford Philosophy. Plotinus, 204 or 5 to 270 Common Era, is generally regarded as the founder of Neoplatonism. He is one of the most influential philosophers in antiquity after Plato and Aristotle. The term Neoplatonism is an invention of the early 19th century European scholarship and indicates the penchant of historians for dividing periods into history. In this case, the term was intended to indicate that Plotinus initiated a new phase in the development of Platonic tradition. What this newness amounted to, if anything, is controversial, largely because one's assessment of it depends upon one's assessment of what Platonism is. In fact, Plotinus, like all his successors, regarded himself simply as a Platonist. That is, an expositor and defender of the philosophical position whose greatest exponent was Plato himself. Originality was not thus held as a premium by Plotinus. Nevertheless, Plotinus realized that Plato needed to be interpreted. In addition, between Plato and himself, Plotinus found roughly 600 years of philosophical writing, much of it reflecting engagement with Plato and the tradition of philosophy he initiated. Consequently, there were at least two avenues for originality open to Plotinus, even if it was not his intention to say fundamentally new things. The first was in trying to say what Plato meant on the basis of what he wrote or said, or what others reported him to have said. This was the task of exploring the philosophical position that we happen to call Platonism. The second was in defending Plato against those who, Plotinus thought, had misunderstood him and therefore unfairly criticized him. Plotinus found himself, especially as a teacher, taking up these two avenues. His originality must be sought for by following his path. I'm going to read the biographical stuff comes next. So, life and writings. Owing to the unusually fulsome biography of Plotinus's disciple Porphyry, we know more about Plotinus's life than we do about most ancient philosophers. The main facts are these. Plotinus was born in Lycopolis, Egypt, in 204 or 205 Common Era. When he was 28, a growing interest in philosophy led him to the feet of one Ammonius Saccas in Alexandria. After 10 or 11 years with this obscure, though evidently dominating figure, Plotinus was moved to study Persian and Indian philosophy. In order to do so, he attached himself to the military expedition of Emperor Gordian III to Persia in 243. The expedition was aborted when Gordian was assassinated by his troops. Plotinus thereupon seems to have abandoned his plans, making his way to Rome in 245. There he remained until his death in 270 or 271. Porphyry informs us that during the first 10 years of his time in Rome, Plotinus lectured exclusively on the philosophy of Ammonius. During this time he also wrote nothing. Porphyry tells us that when he himself arrived in Rome in 263, the first 21 of Plotinus's treatises had already been written. The remainder of the 54 treatises constituting his Aeneads were written in the last 7 or 8 years of his life. Porphyry's biography reveals a man at once otherworldly and deeply practical. The former is hardly surprising in a philosopher, but the latter deserves to be noted and is impressively indicated by the fact that a number of Plotinus's acquaintances appointed him as guardian to their children when they died. Plotinus' writings were edited by Porphyry, there was perhaps another edition by Plotinus's physician Eustochius, though all traces of it are lost. It is to Porphyry that we owe the somewhat artificial division of the writings into 6 groups of 9, hence the name Enneads from the Greek word for 9. In fact, there are somewhat fewer than 54. Porphyry artificially divided some of them into separately numbered treatises, and the actual number of these is of no significance. The arrangement of the treatises is also owing to Porphyry and does evince an ordering principle. Ennead 1 contains roughly ethical discussions. Enneads 2 and 3 contain discussions of natural philosophy and cosmology. Though 3 chapters 4, 5, 7, and 8 do not fit into this rubric so easily. Ennead 4 is devoted to matters of psychology. Ennead 5 to epistemological matters, especially the intellect. And Ennead 6 to numbers, being in general, and the one above intellect, the first principle of all. It is to be emphasized that the ordering is Porphyry's. The actual chronological ordering, which Porphyry also provides for us, does not correspond at all to the ordering in the edition. For example, Ennead 1, chapter 1 is the 53rd treatise chronologically, one of the last things Plotinus wrote. These works vary in size from a couple of pages to over 100. They seem to be occasional writings in the sense that they constitute written responses by Plotinus to questions and problems raised in his regular seminars. Sometimes these questions and problems guide the entire discussion, so that it is sometimes difficult to tell when Plotinus is writing in his own voice or expressing the views of someone else. Typically, Plotinus would at his seminars have read out passages from Platonic or Aristotelian commentators. It is being assumed that the members of the seminar were already familiar with the primary texts. Then a discussion of the text along with the problems it raised occurred. One must not suppose that the study of Aristotle at these seminars belonged to a separate course on the great successor to Plato. After Plotinus, in fact, Aristotle was studied on his own as preparation for studying Plato. But with Plotinus, Aristotle, it seems, was assumed to be himself one of the most effective expositors of Plato. Studying both Aristotle's own philosophy, as explained by commentators such as Alexander of Aphrodisias, and from the 2nd and early 3rd century Common Era, and his explicit objections to Plato, was a powerful aid in understanding the master's philosophy. In part, this was owing to the fact that Aristotle was assumed to know Plato's philosophy at first hand, and to have recorded it, including Plato's unwritten teachings. In addition, later Greek historians of philosophy tell us that Plotinus' teacher, Ammonius Saccas, was among those Platonists who assumed that in some sense Aristotle's philosophy was in harmony with Platonism. This harmony did not preclude disagreements between Aristotle and Plato, nor did it serve to prevent misunderstandings of Platonism on Aristotle's part. Nevertheless, Plotinus' wholesale adoption of many Aristotelian arguments and distinctions will seem less puzzling when we realize that he took these both as compatible with Platonism and as useful for articulating the Platonic position, especially in areas which Plato was himself not explicit. The next section is called The Three Fundamental Principles of Plotinus's Metaphysics. And I'll do that in another section.